The full text of Zhang Ailing's Jasmine Pieces. The pot of jasmine tablets I brewed for you may be a little too bitter. The Hong Kong legend I am about to tell you is probably equally painful. Hong Kong is a gorgeous but sad city. You pour a cup of tea first. Be careful. You pointed your mouth and blew it gently. The car suddenly stopped. He opened his eyes and saw a classmate coming up, Professor Yan's daughter Yan Danzhu. He frowned. He hated meeting acquaintances on the bus because he couldn't hear them because the car was roaring. He is slightly deaf, which was caused by his father's hearing loss. Yan Danzhu had probably just washed his hair, which had not yet been dried. He had a haircut straight down the middle. Chuanqing came closer to her, and only then did he hear clearly, and answered said, "Hey." The ticket seller came over and asked for money. Chuanqing put his hand into his robe to take out his wallet. Danzhu said, "I'm a monthly ticket." Then he said, "What courses did you choose this semester?" Chuanqing said, "It's almost the same as before. Not much has changed." Danzhu smiled and said, "Do you still study the history of literature taught by my father?" Chuanqing nodded. Danzhu smiled and said, "You know, I also chose this course." Chuanqing said in surprise, "You plan to be your father's student?" Danzhu laughed and said, "No." Nagging him, he was so sullen. Finally, I bet him that if I take his class, no matter what problems I have, I will never ask. Then he agreed. Chuanqing sighed slightly and said, "Professor Yan, he is a good person." Danzhu smiled and said, "What? Isn't it good that he is a teacher? You don't like taking his class." Chuanqing said, "You just look at my score list and you can tell that he doesn't like me." Danzhu said, "Where did you come from?" "He is very strict with you because you are from Shanghai and have a higher level of Chinese than students in Hong Kong. He often praises you. Come on, say you're just a little lazy." At school, no one paid attention to him. He himself felt unpopular and avoided people more and more, but he could not avoid Danzhu. He didn't understand her intentions. She has no shortage of friends. Although she has only been studying at South China University for half a year, she already has a considerable status in the school beauty team. Why would she want to be close to him? He glanced sideways at her. Danzhu spoke again. He waved his shield hair and forced a smile. "I'm sorry, I didn't hear you." She raised her voice and said it again. Halfway through, he couldn't listen carefully again. She smiled and said, "I told you the day before yesterday about the letter Daquan wrote to me. Please forget it. Just pretend that I didn't say it," Chuanqing said. "Why?" Danzhu said. "Why? That's obvious. I shouldn't tell people this kind of thing. I'm too childish and can't hold a few words in my stomach." Chuanqing leaned forward and rested his elbows on his knees. "Just laugh." Danzhu also followed him and leaned forward a little and asked solemnly, "Chuanqing, have you not misunderstood me? What I told you is definitely not to boast. I can't help but talk to people, because some words are too uncomfortable to keep in my heart, like Daquan. I lost a friend like him when I rejected him. I love being friends with him. I love being friends with many people. As for other issues, our age too young to talk about it at all. But they're also serious." After a while, she asked again, "Chuanqing, do you find it annoying?" Chuanqing shook his head. Danzhu said, "I don't know why. I don't say these words to anyone except you." Chuanqing said, "I don't know why either." Danzhu said, "I think it's because I regard you as, you treat a girl like that." Chuanqing smiled sourly and said, "Really? You have a lot of girlfriends. How come you picked me alone?" Danzhu said, "Because you are the only one who can keep the secret." Chuanqing gasped and said, "Yes, because I have no friends and no one to tell." Danzhu said hurriedly, "You misunderstood me again." The two of them were silent for a long time. Danzhu sighed and said, "I said the wrong thing. But, Chuanqing, why don't you try to make a few friends? When you play and study, you also have a company. Why don't you invite us? Go into your house to play tennis. I know you have a tennis court," Chuanqing said with a smile. "Our tennis courts are rarely used for tennis. Most of them were filled with clothes to dry. And when the weather was warm, They cooked opium there. Danzhu paused and couldn't continue. However, she finally asked sadly, You always make me feel that I have broken the law, as if I have no right to be so happy. In fact, it doesn't bother you that I am happy. Chuanqing took the book in her hand and wiped off the water stains on it. After rubbing it, he said, Are these the newly compiled lecture notes by Professor Yan? I haven't bought it yet. Do you think it's ridiculous? I've been studying with him for half a year, and I still don't know his name. Danzhu said, I like his name. I often tell him that his name is prettier than his name. Chuanqing found it on the paper and read it out. Yan sighed. He put the book down and tilted his head to think about it, picked it up and read it again. Yan sighed. This time, he was a little hesitant, as if he didn't quite understand these words. Danzhu asked, Isn't this a good name? Chuanqing smiled and said, Okay, why not? I know you have a good father. Everything is good, but he spoils you rotten. Danzhu spat softly after making a sound. He stood up and said, It's time for me to go down. Goodbye. After she left, Chuanqing leaned his head against the glass window, as if he had dozed off again. The man holding azaleas standing in front also went down. There were no more azaleas outside the window, and only the gray street remained. His face, with a different background, seemed to be yellower and darker. The car turned another corner. The palm trees rustled against the window. He jumped up, rang the bell, and got out of the car when it stopped. His house is a big house. When they first moved from Shanghai, the yard was full of flowers and trees. In just 2 or 3 years, everything was withered. Everything was dead. Everything was chopped down. The sun was shining, and everything was desolate. A handyman dragged a rattan chair over on the grass and poured a pot of boiling water on it to kill the bedbugs. Have you seen the old lady? Chuanqing said. I'll see you later when we have dinner. What are you busy with? Mother Liu grabbed his sleeve and said, Here you go again. Did you do something bad again? You're hiding from people? Go as soon as possible. Just meet him and it's over. If you don't go, you will be angry again. Chuanqing suddenly became 7 or 8 years younger, gritted his teeth and refused to go. The more Liu Ma pushed him, the more he got nudged. Liu Ma was the maid his mother had originally married. At home, he hated Ma Liu, just as he hated Yan Danzhu at school. In the cold weather, people are numb from the cold, but that's okay. The slightest bit of warmth made him feel so cold and heartbroken. Both of them snorted irrationally. Chuanqing felt a stone fall in his heart just now, guessing that nothing would happen to them today. His father asked, Has the tuition been paid? Chuanqing sat down on a sofa chair next to the cigarette couch and replied, Paid. The young master has a bad temper. At worst, we can hire a tutor at home and be his tutor at any time. His father said, I don't have the spare money to hire a tutor for him. What else could I choose? Chuanqing said, The history of Chinese literature. His father said, That will be an advantage for you. You have already read Tang poetry and song poetry. His father turned over on the cigarette can, held a roll of newspapers, knocked on his neck, and shouted, If your hands are idle and have nothing to do, they will spoil things. His stepmother said, Go over there and burn some cigarettes. His father asked, He doesn't even have a boyfriend, but he also has a girlfriend. His stepmother smiled and said, Chuanqing, let me ask you. Someone outside said that there is a young lady named Yan who is also from Shanghai and is pursuing her there. Have you said this? Chuanqing blushed and said, Yan Danzhu has many friends. Where would you fall in love with me? His father said, Who said she fell in love with you? Am not interested in your money. Take a fancy to you. Just you? Why? Because it touched his father's hidden fears. Once the money is in his hands, will he spend it like crazy? This timid, sullen idiot-like child. His father didn't mean to train him to be this kind of person. Now that his father saw him, he only felt angry and helpless, and privately a little scared. His father said, I beat him. But he didn't cry. He just stared at people with his eyes wide open. I hated him for staring at people. he would get angry when he saw it. At this time, Chuanqing said, with a cigarette burning in his hand. He couldn't help but open his confused eyes again, staring blankly at his father. One day, at that time, it will be his world, but he has been treated like a human being. Strange victory. The opium on the cigarette sticks dripped into the cigarette lamp. If you make people laugh at you, it is not embarrassing for you, but it is even more embarrassing for me, his stepmother said. This child doesn't have any disease. He is just as skinny as a stick. People look at him and think we have treated him wrong. I haven't seen him eat or drink less all day long. Chuanqing hung his head and left the room. He was met by a female guest. He flashed in the shadows and looked around without anyone. But today I don't know why, but after smelling this smell, I felt dizzy and just wanted to vomit. It was better to be cleaner in the living room downstairs. He picked up the book and ran down. Full of irritability, there was a faint sun and dust in the living room. There was a chicken feather broom in the red vase. He sat down next to the mahogany square table in the middle and leaned on the marble tabletop. The tabletop was cold, like the glass windows on a bus. The azaleas outside the window. The Yan Danzhu in the window. Danzhu's father is Yan Zai. He saw that name when he was a child, before he could read well, on the empty pages in the cover of a worn-out Morning Chow magazine. He once struggled to recognize each word, author, by Luo Nushi King 1. She took off the tablecloth from her shoulders, spread it on the table, and tied straps on the table legs. Chuanqing said, "What? You want to play cards?" Liu Ma said. 3 and 1, I called my uncle to ask for it. As she said that, she saw the handyman come in and replace a light bulb with 100 lights. Chuanqing had no choice but to pack up his textbooks and go back upstairs. There was a large rattan box piled in the corner of his bedroom, full of tattered books. He remembered there was a stack of Morning Tide magazines there. There was a strap tied across the top of the rattan box. He was too lazy to take it off, so he pried up one end of the lid of the box, put his hand in, and started flipping round. Suddenly, he remembered that the Morning Tide magazine had been lost when they moved, and not a single copy was left. He let his hands be caught in the box and pressed tightly by the lid of the box. The head was hanging down, and the neck bones seemed to be broken. The collar of the blue jacket stood straight up, and the sun's warm rays penetrated through the collar and reached the hollow of his neck. However, he had a strange feeling, as if it was getting dark. It was already dark. He stood alone in front of the window, and the sky in his heart also darkened. Indescribable dim sadness. Just like in a dream, the person guarding in front of the window was himself first. In an instant, he saw clearly that it was his mother. Her front bangs hang down long, her head is bowed, and the pointed lower half of her face is just a white shadow. As for her green eyes and eyebrows, they're just shadows within the shadows. However, he knew for sure that it was his dead mother Fang Beluo. He lost his mother when he was 4 years old, but he knew her from her photos. There is only one photo of her before her marriage. She is wearing an ancient replica satin jacket with a small bat-like hidden flower. Now, the portrait in front of the window gradually became clearer, and he could see the bat on her autumn-colored replica satin coat. She was waiting for someone, a message. She knew the news would never come. The sky in her heart gradually darkened. Chuanqing's body twitched painfully. He didn't know if it was his mother or himself. As for the nameless, gnawing melancholy, he now understood that it was love, a desperate love from more than 20 years ago. More than 20 years later, the knife is rusty, but it is still a knife. The knife in his mother's heart was twisting in his heart again. Chuanqing spent a lot of effort before he finally raised his head. All illusions quickly disappeared. At that moment, he seemed to be an old-fashioned photographer, taking pictures of people in the black cloth, and caught a glimpse of his mother in the camera mirror. He took his hand out from under the lid of the box, put it to his mouth, and sucked on the red mark on the back of his hand. He knew very little about his mother. He knew she had never loved his father. His father hated her just for that. When she died, she took out her anger on the children she left behind. Otherwise, despite his stepmother's instigation, his father would not be so cruel to him. His mother had not loved his father had she loved anyone else. There is such a legend among friends and relatives. When his stepmother married into the Nie family, she was a close relative, so his stepmother also heard about it. Of course, she didn't want people to forget this, and she also talked about his mother in front of Chuanqing. Any words she said would not sound good to her. Bai Luo's dowry maid Liu Ma couldn't stand her slander about the deceased, so she always angrily defended herself to other servants. So Chuanqing had the opportunity to hear some facts that he thought were reliable. From a modern perspective, that fact seems pitifully bland. Feng Baluo was 18 years old when she got married. Before getting engaged, there was a period when she longed to go to school. In a conservative family like the Feng family, that is of course impossible. However, she still secretly planned with several cousins. Because the cousins were much younger, their parents were more indulgent. They finally got their wish. They decided to enroll in a Chinese and Western girls' school and invited a distant relative to make up lessons. Yan Zai is younger than them, but older than them. He has been studying in university for 2 years. While Bai Luo envied her cousin's luck, she was still unwilling to give up on her dream of entering school. So she was still very concerned about everything they applied for. She met Yan Zai several times at her cousin's place. They never spoke alone. The Yan family asked someone to come out and say goodbye. Before Bai Luo's mother could answer, the old aunt her grandfather had left behind was sitting nearby smoking a hookah. She smiled and then interjected, "It's too early to mention this matter now." The matchmaker said with a smile, "The young lady is not young either." The old aunt smiled and said, "I don't mean her age. No matter how strong the Chang Shuyan family is, they are still a business family. If their young master is well educated, he will be passed down to us for 2 or 3 generations. If you come to propose marriage, there is still room for negotiation. Now, it's too early." Seeing that the matchmaker was embarrassed, he had no choice but to go back to the Yan family. Yan Zai heard the Feng family's reply over and over again. He was so angry that he put the matter aside. However, they appear to have met once more since then. It definitely can't be a coincidence, because once the marriage has been proposed, both parties have to avoid suspicion. The last short meeting was probably Baluo's initiative. Baluo hinted that Zai would once again ask someone to communicate with her parents because her parents had not given any categorical rejection. But Zai is young and energetic, and is unwilling to be repeatedly criticized as a high climber, causing his family to suffer even more serious insults. He told Baluo that he was planning to study abroad soon. She could take decisive action, and the two of them go together. But Baluo couldn't do this. Chuanqing couldn't help but hate his mother when he recalled this part, but he also admitted that she had her own last resort. 20 years ago was 20 years ago. She had to take care of her family's reputation, and she had to take care of Zai's future. I went abroad alone at midnight. When he came back, the Feng family had already married Bai Luo to Nie Chuanqing. There are also several romances in Midnight. As for how he married Danzhu's mother, a southern girl, and how he moved to Hong Kong in recent years, Chuanqing had never heard of it. Regarding Bai Luo's married life, Chuanqing did not dare to speculate. She is not a bird in a cage. A bird in a cage will fly out if the cage is opened. She is the bird embroidered on the screen, a white bird among the golden clouds on the melancholy purple satin screen. As the years passed, the feathers became dull, moldy, and moth-eaten, and the dead ones were still stuck on the screen. She is dead. She is finished. But where is Chuanqing? Why should Chuanqing suffer this? Bai Luo married into the Nie family, which was at least a sober sacrifice. It was said that King Shang was born in the Nie family, but he had no right to choose at all. Another bird was added to the screen. Even if it were killed, it would not be able to fly off the screen. He has followed his father for 20 years and has become mentally disabled. Even if he is given freedom, he cannot run away. Can't run. There was simply no hope of avoiding it, so I gave up. But now for the first time, he put all the scattered rumors and speculations together to piece together a story. He just knew, more than 20 years ago, when he was still not born, he had hope of escaping. There is a possibility that his mother will marry Yan Zai. He almost turned out to be Yan Zai's child and Yan Danzhu's brother. Maybe he is Yan Danzhu. Without him, there would be no her. The next day at school, Chuanqing was in a state of confusion when he learned about the history of Chinese literature. From a distance, he saw Yan Danzhu sneaking in quietly with a heavy patent leather notebook in her arms. She picked a seat on the left side of the front row, where the professor's eyes could not reach her, probably for fear of disturbing her father. The attention distracted his mind. She turned around and smiled at Chuanqing. There was an empty seat next to her, so a male student next to Chuanqing pushed Chuanqing and encouraged him to sit next to her. Chuanqing shook his head. The man smiled and said, "There are fools like you. Are you afraid of ruining your fortune or something? If you don't go, I will." After that, as soon as he stood up, several other students had already rushed forward. One of them arrived first and occupied the seat. Although it was still late spring at that time, it was already extremely hot. Danzhu added a long-sleeved white gauze jacket to the cheongsam. She turned sideways and talked and laughed with the person next to her, holding her chin in one hand. Her lively red gold face and arms, hidden by the gauze, were like amber wine in a glass. However, in Chuanqing's eyes, she did not just rouse a simple sense of beauty. There he thought, she doesn't look like Yan Zai. Then, she must be like her mother, the girl from southern China whom Yan Zai married. Yan Zai was pale and a little thin. The beauty of most men only becomes more obvious after they are 30 years old. Yan Zai was an example. After all, he must be over 45, right? But he looks much younger. Yan Zai came in and walked up to the podium. Chuanqing seemed to feel that he had never seen him before. This was the first time Chuanqing felt the special beauty of Chinese robes. Chuanqing himself wears a robe for economic reasons, but like most young people, he likes suits. However, the large gray silk robe and the loose pleats made Yan Zai's figure even more elegant. Chuanqing couldn't help but fantasize. If he was Yan Zai's child, would he look like Yan Zai? In all likelihood, they are similar, because he is a boy, different from Danzhu. Yan Zai opened the roll call book. Li Mingguang, Dong Deji, Wang Lifen, Wang Zongwei, Wang Xiaoyi, Nie Chuanqing. Chuanqing agreed, but he suspected that his voice was a little strange, and his face turned red. However, Yan Zai continued to call, Qin Defen, Zhang Shixian. One hand was on the table, and the other hand was leisurely holding the roll call book. A man who has experienced the hardships of the world, but there is no lack of some small things in his life. Happy people. Chuanqing thought that this person's blood might be flowing in his veins. Oh, what kind of fruit would it be? It should be a light blue, crystal clear and juicy fruit, like a lychee without a pit, sweet with a bit of bitterness inside. If his mother had been a little willful and selfish, and at the last minute of saying goodbye to Yan Zai, under the control of her emotions, she might have changed her original intention and said to him, "Everything I did in the past was done by my parents. Lord, now you make the decision for me. Whatever you say will be done." If she hadn't been so forward-looking and backward-looking behind, does she really care about the future? Did she think about her future children? She killed her child. Chuanqing didn't know that his condemnation of his mother was unfair. She was a girl of 17 or 18 at that time, and it was rare to have such a strong moral sense. Anyone who encounters a problem that is difficult to solve can only do what he feels comfortable with. Could he blame his mother? Professor Yan turned his back and wrote on the blackboard. The students were copying in a rustle, but Chuanqing's heart was not in the book. Eat one if and peel off another if. For example, if his mother and Yan Zai get married, their cohabitation life may not be a long and flawless happen in the suit. Chuanqing learned from Liu's mother that Bai Luo was a thoughtful and sensitive woman. Danzhu once told him, Yan Zai's temper is quite idiotic, and he also likes to be careless. People who are in love often argue, but people who are indifferent can tolerate each other. At the same time, Baluo's break with her family was not allowed by the society at that time. Midnight's marriage will inevitably affect his future. In the past 10 years, the opinions of ordinary people have certainly changed, but Midnight has already been wasted several times, and its energy has been extinguished. If a man is not successful in his career, misunderstandings and quarrels at home are inevitable. So, will all this have a negative impact on their children? No. Just good. Small sorrows and difficulties can develop a serious outlook on life. Chuanqing believes that if he were the child of Zai and Beluo, he would be deeper and more thoughtful than Danzhu now. At the same time, children in a loving family, no matter how unstable their lives are still full of self-confidence and compassion, positive, enterprising and brave. He must have all the advantages that Danzhu has, and he also has the ones that Danzhu doesn't have. His eyes shot to Danzhu sitting in the front row. Danzhu listened intently to Professor Yan's lecture, tilted his face, opened his mouth slightly, and tapped his small, white front teeth with a pencil. The profile of her face has extremely smooth lines, especially the childish short nose. Her nose was shiny and slightly oily, making her look more like a wet bronze statue in a fountain. She majored in science at South China University, but she also found some time to read some literature and history. She felt a broad interest in everything and in everyone. Chuanqing suddenly came up with a two-word comment about how she treated her classmates equally: promiscuity. She struck up a conversation with everyone, but when others asked for something more than friendship, she avoided them on the grounds that they were both in school and not qualified to fall in love. What's that, after graduation? What can she do? After all, it's not about getting married. The more Chuanqing thought about it, the more he felt she was shallow and boring. If he has such a good family background as hers, he will definitely be able to take advantage of this opportunity and become a perfect person. In short, he didn't like Yan Danzhu. His hatred for Danzhu, just like his abnormal admiration for Yan Zai, was growing day by day. In this state of mind, of course he couldn't study. At the end of the semester, his test results were all bad except for literary history, which was even worse. He was far from passing. His father scolded him. However, he still asked someone to tell the school authorities to give him another chance and let him continue to attend classes after the fall semester. When Chuanqing came back to school, his mental abnormality not only did not heal, but actually deepened. Because after a summer vacation, he had unlimited leisure to calmly reflect on the source of his pain. He has more opportunities for daily contact with his father Nie Chuanqing than before. He found that he resembled his father in many places, not only his facial contours, facial features, and limbs, but also his walking posture and various small movements. He deeply hated Nie Chuanqing, who existed within himself. He had ways of avoiding his father, but he himself was always with him. Chuanqing felt as if his chest was filled with grievances that he couldn't express. Danzhu took another step closer and asked Chuanqing, "Is this a matter of your family?" Chuanqing smiled lightly and said, "You are too nosy." Danzhu was not angry, but laughed along with him. She would never have imagined that Chuanqing really hated her because everyone liked her. The pine branches blown by the wind hit her head. She said yo, and hid behind Chuanqing. Taking advantage of the situation, she held Chuanqing's arm and said softly, "Why on earth?" Chuanqing let go of her hand and said, Why? I want to ask you, why are you always pestering me? A girl's family doesn't care about her face. She doesn't even think about your father." Danzhu, after hearing this, I couldn't help but take a step back. He walked in front and she followed behind, but they were 2 or 3 feet away. She sighed faintly and said, "I'm sorry, I forgot again. There is a difference between men and women. I always thought I was still young. People in my family treat me like a child." Chuanqing jumped up again and said, "3 words can't be separated from your home. Who doesn't know that you have a model family? It's a pity that you are not a model daughter." Danzhu said, "Listening to your tone, it sounds like you just can't see me. As if my happiness makes you unhappy. But, Chuanqing, I know you are not that kind of person." "What on earth are you?" Chuanqing said. "Why on earth? It's not because I'm jealous of you. Jealous of your beauty, your intelligence, your popularity." Danzhu said, "You refuse to say a serious word to me." "Chuanqing, you know I'm yours, my friend. I want you to be happy," Chuanqing said. "You want to share some happiness with me, right? When you are full, sweep the crumbs off the table and feed them to the dog, right?" "I don't want it. I don't want it. I don't want it. I would rather die than don't want it." The mountain road turned a corner and suddenly opened up, revealing the entire sky and sea. There is a flat cliff hanging in the air beside the road, surrounded by a semicircular iron railing. Chuanqing was walking in front. When he turned around, Danzhu was not behind him. When he looked again, he found her leaning on the railing. The pines at the foot of the cliff are surging, and there is also a kind of cold-tolerant tree, with leaves that are green on one side and white on the other. The strong wind blows, and the leaves all over the mountain are tossed and turned, and only a little bit of silver light can be seen splashing round. Where the clouds opened, the yellowish moon of winter came out, and the white sky and sea opened a mica stone screen behind Danzhu. She wore a cloak of emerald green velvet, with a wine bag attached to it, and the wine bag was lined with white velvet. She also likes to wear white in the harsh winter, because white is a sharp contrast to her dark skin. Chuanqing had never seen her dressed up like this. The wine bag was half faded on the back of her head, revealing the curly hair piled high on top. With the light behind her, her face couldn't be seen clearly, but her eyes were staring at him scorchingly. Chuanqing lowered his eyes, cut his hands behind his back, and stood up straight. After a while, he raised his head again and asked, simply, "Are you leaving?" She had turned around, her back to him. The wind became more and more violent, swelling her cloak until it floated over her head. She was wearing a green-white velvet robe. At first glance, the cloak was floating in the air like a huge parachute, and her white body was floating under the umbrella. Was she a paratrooper sent from the Moon Palace? Chuanqing slowly walked to her side. Is Danzhu in love with him there? Can't do it? However, she did try to get close to him again and again. For example, tonight, she was running around with him in the empty mountain in the middle of the night. She usually plays and laughs with her classmates. She seems to be very measured and not just a one person. Why treat him as an exception? He thought over her words and actions just now. For a girl, that's already an obvious sign, right? He hates her, but he is an incompetent person. What's the use of just hating her? If she loves him, he has the power to dominate her and can perform all kinds of top-secret mental abuse on her. That was his only hope of revenge. He asked in a trembling voice, "Danzhu, do you like me at all?" A little. She was really not afraid of the cold. Her bare arms stretched out from her cloak and rested on the railing. He held it with both hands, lowered his head, and wanted to rest his cheek on her arm. But for some reason, he stopped in midair, and tears fell one after another. He leaned over the railing, resting his arm on his head, his own. Does she love him a little? He doesn't want revenge. He just wants a little love, especially the love of people from the Yan family. Since the Yan family has no blood relationship with him, then a marriage relationship will do. No matter what, he wanted to have some contact with the Yan family. Danzhu pulled down the flying cloak, tied it tightly around his body, and said with a smile, more than a little, "I don't like you. How can I be friends with you?" Chuanqing stood up straight and took a breath. Said, "Friend, I don't want you to be my friend." Danzhu said, "But you need friends." Chuanqing said, "Friends alone are not enough. I want my father and mother." Danzhu looked at him in shock. He grabbed the iron railing tightly, as if it was her hand, and said passionately, "Danzhu, if you are in love with someone else, to him, you are just a lover. But to me, you are not just a lover. You are a creator, a father, a mother, a new environment, a new world. You are the past and the future. You are God." Danzhu was silent for a while, then quietly replied, "I'm afraid I don't have that big of an expectation. If I fall in love with someone, at most I can only be his lover and wife. As for other things, I can't be so self-aware." A gust of wind choked Chuanqing. He turned his face away, gripped the railing with both hands, and whispered, "Then, you don't love me?" "Not at all." Danzhu said, "I have never considered it." Chuanqing said, "Because I am a girl." Danzhu said, No, really. But she was a little embarrassed at first, then suddenly felt annoyed, frowned, coughed tiredly and said, "Since you don't, if you like hearing this, why bother forcing me to say it?" Chuanqing turned his back and gritted his teeth and said, "You treat me like a girl. You simply don't treat me like a human being." He said through gritted teeth. He lost control of his throat, and by the end of the sentence he was practically screaming. Danzhu was taken aback and subconsciously left the railing facing the deep valley in 3 steps and moved to a safer position. After running over, I felt that I was ridiculously nervous. After calming down, Nie Chuanqing smiled and said, "You want me to treat you as a man? That's fine. I promise you, I will try to see you in another way. But you also have to show some masculinity. You cry so easily when you don't have fun." Chuanqing laughed a few times and said, "You are really good at coaxing children. Good boy, don't cry. How old are you? You cry when you don't have fun. Ha 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 ha." He laughed, pulled away, and went down the mountain. Danzhu stood stunned for a while. She didn't expect Chuanqing to fall in love with her. Of course, that's reasonable. There was no one close to him, but she repeatedly expressed her affection for him. She seduced him, although that was not her intention, but could not give him satisfaction. There was obviously something that was causing him pain lately. Is it just for her? So, in the final analysis, all the troubles are still caused by her? She tried so hard to help him, but instead she harmed him. She couldn't let him go away in such a crazy way. If he caused any trouble, she would never be able to forgive herself in her lifetime. She forgave him for his selfishness, his rudeness, and his inhumanity, because he loved her. It satisfied her vanity that even such an eccentric man loved her. Danzhu is a kind woman, but she is still a woman. He had already gone very far, but she caught up with him after all, shouting all the way, "Chuanqing! Wait a minute! Wait a minute!" Chuanqing only acted but did not listen. She chased after him, but for a moment she felt that there were so many things to think about and there was nothing to talk about. She gasped and said, "You tell me. You tell me." Chuanqing burst out a few words from between his teeth. "Tell you. I want you to die. With you, there will be no me. With me, there is no you. Do you understand?" He held her shoulders tightly with one arm and pressed her head down desperately with the other hand, as if to ask her to retract her head. Go into the cavity. She shouldn't have been born into this world at all. And he wanted her to go back. He didn't know where the brute strength came from. However, his hands and feet were still not sharp enough. She didn't cry out, but struggled, and the two of them rolled down the stone steps together. Chuanqing got up, raised his legs, and kicked the people on the ground. While kicking, he was cursing like water from his mouth. He spoke so fast that even he himself couldn't hear clearly. "It probably seems to be. You are sure that I am a bad person. In the middle of the night, alone, and I are on the mountain. Are you not so relieved if it is another person? You are sure that I will not kiss you or hit you, kill you, right? Right? Nie Chuanqing. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. Chuanqing can send me home. You have spotted me." After the first kick, she let out a low cry. And there was no sound from then on. He couldn't stop kicking her hard for fear that she would still be alive. However, he was also afraid of continuing to play. After the kick, his legs became weak and numb. In the conflict of double terror, he finally left her and ran down the mountain. The body seemed to be in a nightmare, soaring in the clouds and mist, without touching the ground. All one could see were the layers of stone steps rising and falling in front of the eyes in the moonlight. After running for a long distance, he suddenly stopped. There was no one in Black Mountain except him and Danzhu. The two of them were 70 or 80 yards apart, but he could vaguely hear her labored breathing. In this moment, he was connected with her soul, and he knew that she was not dead. So, what if you know? Did he have the guts to go back and end up killing her? He stood quietly for only 2 or 3 seconds, but he thought it was 2 or 3 hours. He ran down again. This time, he ran without stopping until he reached the driveway at the foot of the mountain, where there were cars. It was so cold at home that the whitewashed walls turned blue from the cold. There was no stove in Chuanqing's room, and the air was so cold that it made one's nose feel sore when breathing. However, the window was not opened, not for a long time. and the room could smell the greasy smell of dust and hair. Chuanqing lay face down on the bed. He heard his father next door saying to his stepmother, "This child is gradually becoming ambitious. He came back so late after dancing." His stepmother said, "It seems that it's time to marry him." Chuanqing burst into tears, dripped down. His mouth moved a little, as if he wanted to smile, but he couldn't move, and his face seemed to be covered with a layer of ice. It was like a layer of ice was covering my body. Danzhu is not dead. School started in 2 days, and he had to see her at school. He can run. June 1943.
Alright, this part of the story ends here.
Want to know what happened next? Let's listen to the breakdown next time.